Hey, welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. It's great to have you with us once again this week. I'm here with Pastor Nick. He is the pastor of Whitefields Community Church, and we're currently going through a series in the book of Romans called Saving Grace, and we were in chapter 15 this week, and the last part of chapter 15. And we had a question on Instagram this week dealing with chapter 15 of Romans. You know, we have Paul. He has made all these plans. So he say, hey, guys, I'm coming to meet you there in Rome, and then I'm going to Jerusalem, and then I'm going off to Spain. And as we find out, none of this happened. None of this happened. Actually, none of what Paul said in chapter 15 actually happened, not the way that he thought it was going to happen. You know, they didn't receive him well in Jerusalem. He ends up never going to Spain, well, later on. And then he ends up coming to Rome as a prisoner. And so the question was Paul wrong in making plans? Was Paul wrong? Had he really heard from God that these were the things that he was supposed to do? And, you know, it brings up that passage in James chapter 4, verse 13, where James says, you know, come now, who are you to say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit? You know, kind of almost feel like he's, you know, talking against these plans. And I once had this guy back in Debrecen. Actually, we were both there in Debrecen. And one day on Sunday morning, we met him at the crosswalk by the church. And we're like, well, what are you doing, dude? And he's like, well, I'm waiting for the Lord to tell me whether or not to go to church this morning and he cited this passage in James. So you have these kind of extremes. Should we be making plans? How do we know when God is actually speaking to us? So that's our question today. You know, was Paul wrong in making these plans?
So I don't think Paul was wrong at all in making plans. I think if you go to Proverbs, what you'll find out is that the Proverbs don't have very nice things to say to people who don't plan ahead. It calls them sluggards, calls them slothful, lazy, people who don't think about the future, don't plan ahead, don't save up towards something. Jesus, for example, tells us to count the cost, and he uses the example of somebody who saves money, and that's a good thing. One of the most misunderstood parables that Jesus told is in Luke chapter 16. It's the parable of the dishonest steward. And a lot of people are really confused by it because there's this guy who he gets fired from his job, and his boss basically says, like in our terminology, he says, hey, you've got until 5 p.m. today and you're out of here. So, you know, finish up your work by 5 p.m. and then you're gone forever. And the guy takes the entire day and he goes through his contacts with his work, and he offers them deals which don't really help his boss. He's kind of shortchanging his boss, but yet it garners him favor in the eyes of the people, so that when he's no longer working for that company, those people will want to work with him in the future wherever he goes next. And Jesus looks at this guy and says, see, now that guy's onto something. Now, a lot of people are like, wait a second, that guy was unethical. Well, Jesus isn't saying that his unethical behavior was good. What Jesus is saying is, he's saying, you know, the children of this world are sometimes more shrewd than the children of light when it comes to, tangible matters here on earth. What he's saying is this, that just as some people in the business world look forward to the future, they plan for the future, they kind of reverse engineer their lives thinking, okay, well, if I want my future to be like this, then here's what I need to do. He says, how much more should we do that with our souls? How much more should we do that with our lives? In other words, what he's commending is that person was forward thinking, that they made plans, that they thought ahead. And Jesus commends that. So you look at the Proverbs, you look at Jesus' parables, and you see that the Bible thinks very favorably of people who plan ahead and not favorably of people who don't plan ahead. Now, how does that work? Paul obviously wouldn't have made plans without, praying about them, thinking through, is this what God wants me to do? And yet the plans that he had didn't come to fruition. But I will say that the first step in his plans did. And I found that to be true in my own life. Paul, for him, the first step was take this financial gift to the church in Jerusalem. He did that. Now, everything after that got all thrown off course. But sometimes that's what it is like God tells you, here's the next step. Do this. And then we're like, okay, well, after I do that, then I'm going to do this and this and this. Paul's motives were pure, but God said, hey, I wanted to get you to that place. And then from that place, I would direct you in the course that I want you to go. I didn't give you the 5-year plan. I just gave you the next step. So for me personally, that's how I ended up in Hungary. is that I had all these plans. My plan originally when I went to Hungary, I'm going to stay in Hungary for 8 months, work with the church there, and then I'm going to either go to Bible college or I'm going to move back to the U.S. or I was going to go to Ukraine as a missionary. Kind of one of those three things. And what happened is, but I didn't plan on staying in Hungary. That was the thing. I didn't really have any real desire to go to Hungary, but I got invited. It seemed like they needed some help over there. So I said, okay, I'll go for 8 months. Once I got over there, I had all these plans about what I was going to do next, and God directed my path and said, okay, now that you took that step, you got that first place I wanted you to go. Then he showed me the next step, and it was something that I hadn't considered before, which was to stay in Hungary, which led to planting churches, which led to getting married, and all kinds of wonderful things that I'm so glad happened. But they were not even on my radar, right? And so many times, right, there might be something for my future, your future, listeners' future, it's not even on our radar, but God wants to lead you there. And the way that he'll do it is that he'll just lead you to the next step. But should you not make plans? No, you should absolutely make plans. In fact, that verse from James 4, verse 13, he says, hey, don't forget your life is like a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. He says, instead, what you ought to say, don't be presumptuous, in other words, but what you should say is, if the Lord wills, then we will do this and that. In other words, he's not saying don't make plans. Mm-hmm. He's saying make plans, but submit those plans to the Lord.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you brought up on Sunday, which is key to this, is that what is the motivation for your plan making? And, I think, people just kind of make plans for selfish reasons many times. And I know for me, my missionary life started kind of that way, I was going to do something for the Lord. And I kind of built my plan around that this is what I was going to accomplish. And God kind of changed that whole thing and kind of changed my whole view to be gospel orientated. Like, whatever I'm going to do, what is the end result? What am I attempting to accomplish? Because I realized pretty quickly that I really had nothing to bring to the table. And as my mind and my verse, the verse God gave me when I first took off to Hungary, over 22 years, or 1996, was delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I didn't know what either of that meant. I really did not know what delight yourself in the Lord meant and what my actual desires were. I thought I knew what my desires were. But God, as I took that step and became gospel orientated, that's kind of, guided my steps over the years of my decision making. And don't you think that's kind of one of the most important aspects of what Paul's life, as you kind of look at his life, he was gospel oriented.
Yeah, and I think one way we could put it is that we could say that Paul's goals never changed. His plans changed, but his goal never changed. His goal was, I'm going to preach the gospel. He talks about it in verse 20.
Verse 20, yeah.
I'm going to preach the gospel here or there or everywhere, wherever I end up. His goal didn't change. And I think that's important for us. What is our underlying goal? We talked about that yesterday. Having a missional mentality. No matter where we are, where the path leads, our goals don't change. Our location might change. And that's why we said it's more important how we live this life unto God than where we are geographically or things like that. So.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the key. I think if you was to take away from Sunday's sermon, and I highly recommend that you download it, whitefieldschurch.com, and listen to it. And that's, become missional minded. That's, in this day and age, we really don't have time for much. Just as you mentioned in that passage in James, our life is but a mist. It's going to come and go. And what is our ultimate motivation, our ultimate goal? Is it to get that career? Is it to get the new car or the house or the family? Those things are good. And God might have that all planned for you and us, but what is the ultimate goal? And that's the gospel. And that's what Jesus left the disciples in Matthew chapter 8, to just go, preach the gospel, baptizing them, making disciples. And we're all called to that, not just pastors, but all of us are called to that in some form. And your place is there as well. So take that to heart, missional mentality, download, and really take that to heart. I think it's a great call for all of us as Christians. What is our ultimate goal in this life? So catch us on Facebook, on YouTube, ring that bell, Instagram, and we hope to see you next week. God bless.